Good morning, everyone. This is Craig Spiezle with the Online Trust Alliance, and welcome to this morning's IoT Working Group call. With us today, we're very fortunate to have Travis Hall. Travis is a telecommunications analyst at NTIA, which is, as many of you know, part of the Department of Commerce. The focus on today's call is going to be on the recent NTIA RFC, or Request for Comments, a very thoughtful effort that we've been fortunate to provide some input into the process, and look forward to hearing some feedback from Travis. Just a few things as we get going. We are recording this webinar, and we will be posting that after this so others can refer back to this information being shared. Other points is we'll be taking questions at the end, and certainly feel free to use your question pane within GoToMeeting. Or GoToWebinar, so we can best take your calls as they come in. So I want to just kind of tee up the call a little bit here. Some of you are on that have heard us discussing some of these threats and landscapes of the issues that are impacting consumers, and I would say also the enterprise. We're finding again, unsigned patches and updates. Hardware that's misconfigured, wearables that have disclosed personal information. And perhaps the most concerning one is the recent issue that has really taken headlines, and it's with the Revolve smart home hubs. And I think that this leads into a policy discussion in many areas of what's the consumer's expectation. And ironically, the working group, the IoT working group that OTA formed over a year and a half ago, identified the long-term support of products. And ironically, we were focusing on the security side, primarily of the patching and things here. One of the things that's really come to light is how if companies no longer support the app or the back-end cloud services, what is the effect? And of course, unfortunately, Revolve, as it got acquired by NIST, they've shut down, or they will be shutting that back-end service. So this creates a major policy issue. It certainly creates an issue concerning about consumer disclosures, but it also has an impact, I think, to overall commerce. If we continue to have incidents like this, clearly consumer remorse and trust are clearly going to be impacted here. So those are things that we want to address, and I think they tie in very well to the NTIA process right now. But before we do that, I just want to bring everyone up to speed. So OTA, over a year ago January, stood up a multi-stakeholder effort, involved both the public and private sector. We had over 100 participants, close to 100 submissions to our request for comment, to develop this baseline framework to address the primary areas of security, privacy, and sustainability in these more end-to-end issues. So we're very fortunate that, and to bring everyone up to speed, we're very excited that there are multiple companies that are now developing certification and testing models based on this, and so there's lots of work in progress. Well, but with that said, I'd like to kind of introduce Travis, and maybe Travis, kind of before you get going, share a little bit of your background, your role at NTIA, and then we can talk about the whole white paper, blue paper, green paper process.
All right, thanks a lot, Craig. So my name is Travis Hall. I am a Telecommunications Policy Analyst, as you can see, in the Office of Policy Analysis and Development in NTIA. So that is our domestic policy shop, and we serve as the primary advisor to the President on telecommunications policy issues. My background, I have a PhD in media studies from New York University, and my focus is primarily on privacy and surveillance policy. But coming on board, I've been involved in a number of different both verticals and horizontals on a number of different issues. The big one being, of course, IoT. So I'm the staff lead on this particular work stream. So this is similar to previous work streams that NTIA and the Department of Commerce have done on various issues, including privacy, cybersecurity, and intellectual property rights. And how these work streams go is that we put out a request for comment. We do what we call a green paper, which is a statement of the department. It's an agenda setting and issue spotting paper for the Department of Commerce. And so what that could then turn into is ultimately a white paper. So privacy, cybersecurity, and intellectual property all did end up producing white papers, which is a statement of administration policy. So the good thing about a green paper is that it's somewhat easier to write. It's really a statement of what the Department of Commerce's thoughts are on these issues. The deficiency is that it's not an actual policy statement. But we're hopeful that this, as the other green papers did in the past, will inform that process and will actually lead to a white paper that would be a statement of administration policy. So that's the difference between green paper and white paper. Essentially, it's a stepping stone that both will lead to, hopefully, administration policy, but also really helps to get the Department of Commerce itself on the same page in terms of knowing what our agenda is, and also understanding what the potential issues are. And if you could go ahead and go to the next slide, that'd be great. Okay, I guess. So the other thing that we will be doing, in addition to the green paper, is we will be doing a public workshop. And it is not quite clear right now when that is going to happen. That could possibly be prior to the publishing of the green paper if there are a few issue areas that we really need to delve deeply into, or it might happen after the green paper has been published in order to elicit feedback on our recommendations, on our thoughts. So we will be keeping you updated to that as well. If we could go to the next slide.
Hey, Travis, real quick, do you have any idea of how the format of that workshop is? That going to be in the traditional John Verdi multi-stakeholder type process, or is this kind of be more of a readout and some panels of the findings? Or
it would be much more focused readout, kind of an academic style workshop. It would be less of a multi-stakeholder open to the public process, and it would be much more curated, right? So the multi-stakeholder processes are led by the stakeholders and just simply facilitated by us. This workshop would be a workshop.
Great. Well, hopefully, as the details come forward, we certainly would like to be able to participate in that. So thanks for the update on that.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, so in terms of the questions, there's kind of a repetitive theme throughout. Some of the questions don't quite necessarily fit this pattern, but for the most part, they all fit the same theme. And that is, what are the opportunities, what are the challenges, and what should the proper role of government be in fostering the opportunities and addressing the challenges? And so this goes to questions of policy, such as privacy or cybersecurity. It goes to questions of technology and technology development. It goes towards the government's role in doing our international engagement on these issues. We're not the only country that is excited about IoT, as I'm sure you all know. And then also, and then also in terms of other issues that might not fit easily into any of those prior categories. We're also looking at questions of how should we do economic measurement of IoT, either in terms of measuring IoT generally or doing economic impact measurement, which will help us to figure out how we should be talking about IoT and how we should be moving forward on that. And we can go into more specific discussion of the questions soon. But that's just in terms of what the overarching structure is, and what we're really trying to get at is just simply how do we best foster the opportunities that are being presented to us with the emergence of IoT, how do we really address like the really hard challenges that are being produced by it as well, that Craig, thank you for highlighting some of them. But then the big question is, what should the role of government be in responding to that? Because sometimes just because there's a problem doesn't mean it's a problem that the government needs to come in and solve. So that we're looking specifically at that last question. We could go ahead to the next slide.
So just one question before we go to the role
Sure.
of government. Maybe you can kind of explain a little bit about the DELT, your digital economy leadership team. And when you look at the government, so when we're reviewing the RFC, a lot of it talks about how's the government even within itself looking, and you have multiple agencies that are involved. It was interesting that the FTC is not involved in your DELT program.
Well, so the DELT is Department of Commerce. So as of right now, the digital economy leadership team is just simply leadership within the Department of Commerce. It absolutely interfaces with the FTC, with other government agencies, but it is Alan Davidson, who some of you might know, is great. He is the director of the digital economy, and he's been the one who's been spearheading this effort on behalf of the secretary. So the IPTF, the Internet Policy Task Force, has traditionally been the body or the organizing force that has been behind the RFC's green papers, white papers on intellectual property, cybersecurity, and privacy. And now that is being shared, and the DELT is kind of working through the IPTF to put this out. And one of the differences that you'll see between those previous efforts and what the DELT's work is doing is the DELT is focused more on verticals as opposed to horizontal. So it's looking at IoT as opposed to cross-cutting issues such as privacy and cybersecurity.
Got it. And one of the reasons I point that out, because there's a request for comments from the FTC right now on smart devices, and how are they, so at times it's important to understand the roles and such. And they have, I believe it's December, first week of December, they're hosting a workshop themselves.
And so and we're in close communication with the FTC. They're good friends of ours. However, they are just, it's a wonky thing to say, but it's important. They are an independent commission. So even though they are a part of the federal government and the president does appoint them, they are an independent commission, whereas the Department of Commerce is very much the administration, right? We are a part of the administration. We are a department, but we are a part of the administration itself. Right.
Okay, good. And by the way, if anyone has questions, feel free to raise your hand, and we'll try to take them as we go forward. Because again, as you can tell, this is not scripted, and just trying to kind of help everyone understand the process here, and some of the key questions.
Great. All right, so really quick, so this is, I wanted to make sure that all of you had this information. It is in the RFC, but this is the highlights, the down and dirty. Email comments to IoT RFC at 2016 at ntia.doc.gov. There's a mailing address. Comments are due by the 23rd. And we are going to, all comments are going to be a part of the public record. We will probably post these in either batches or in a batch. We've already started to receive a few comments. And we not only welcome and encourage, well, here, let me say this. We both welcome and encourage as much participation as possible and as wide a participation as possible. I am personally really hopeful that we get a large number of diverse comments, and I think that that's an important thing, because we're really hopeful to make this as strong a statement of what the issues actually are. IoT is a large, cross-cutting, kind of like boil the ocean kind of topic, but I think that that a lot of these issues are things that we do need to grapple with, And I'm hopeful that commenters will help raise issues and help point to what they feel the proper government role is, and that we can then build that into a really solid green paper and a solid statement of what our agenda should be and where the issues lie.
Great. Actually, to that point, one question I already got asked is, how are you working internationally? And so, just from my own perspective, I know myself and I see some of the people that are on the webinar, we've been working with the ITU on their whole Green City initiative. There's other international efforts. Is there any outreach going on with those other organizations to look at what other governments are doing as part of the process?
Absolutely. So I will very much defer any specific questions about our role to my colleagues in either in the International Trade Administration (ITA) or in NTIA's own International Affairs Office. So with that, and I'm happy to put people in contact with the actual experts if you want to be. So with that major grain of salt being put there, we are engaged on multiple levels on the international field. Particularly, we are engaged in the ITU space, ITUT Study Group 20, for example. We are engaged. And one of the hopes to come out of this public request for comment and subsequent green paper is we do have strategies, and we do have moving forward in all of these spaces. And it would be really, really great, though, to make sure that that industry's voice and the U.S. community's voice is heard in terms of what those priorities should be, and for us to have a clear statement of purpose when it comes to IoT. And then smart cities is something of a Venn diagram with that is mainly subsumed under IoTs with small exceptions, but that we then are able to point back to both the public comments and our green paper in terms of expressing how we are going to deal on that stage.
Great. Another comment came in, and I'm trying to decode what they're saying is, what is IoT? Question, boil the ocean. And I'm thinking what they mean is one of the challenges that we determine very much up front. IoT means a lot of different things to different people. Three people might have four different answers of it. So, in our case, we've specifically said to focus on the connected home and those type of devices as wearable technologies. But clearly, the smart cities, the smart grid, critical infrastructure. Are you trying to are you looking at any scope, or are you looking at industrial controls out of scope from the enterprise perspective, or?
Yeah, sure. So that's a great question. The first question in our RFC is, what is different about IoT, right? So a lot of the concerns regarding, for example, privacy, regarding cybersecurity, not all, certainly, but a lot of them we've already been grappling with, right? And we've been grappling with for a long time. But I actually have, I think I was initially something of a skeptic about IoT, but I have come to believe that IoT is qualitatively different in some ways. And so that is our first question. The second question, and thanks for bringing up the RFC so that people can follow along. So the second question. Yeah. I'll let you. Yeah. So we can scroll down to. I believe it is
page 8. Is it?
I've got my paper copy in front of me.
Don't be following this here.
So the first question is on page 8. You're right. So down on. So yeah. So are the challenges and opportunities arising from IoT similar to those that governments and societies have previously addressed with existing technologies? Or are they different? Right? What's new? What's novel? So that's the first question. The second question is, what's at stake in the definition? Right? Um, so there are a decent number of definitions that are floating around, both official and unofficial. And we have not stated, even though we put down like a, a definition just simply in order to have something to talk about, right? But we are not wedded at all to what we said earlier in the introduction in terms of what the definition should be. So one of the big questions that we want to know about is what are the stakes in terms of the definitions? What should the government be defining it by? And then if you look at question 4, if you scroll down to question 4, we do ask the question of whether or not, as particularly in terms of how the government thinks about these things, should we divide and or classify the IoT landscape, right? I think that and this is something that I don't have an answer to, and I'm really looking forward to comments on, is should we have a quote-unquote IoT policy, or does that really truly not make sense, and should there be classifications and divisions in terms of how we look at IoT, for example, industrial IoT versus consumer IoT, or based on based on the technologies used, or something along those lines. And this, along with almost all the questions here, we really want to hear what the community and what the stakeholders think. Because I don't actually think that we have the right answer. Like if you were to push me right now, I don't know what the right answer is. I have some thoughts, but we really want to hear from the community.
Well, just a quick comment. When we've looked at this, is I think what's unique in this space is a rapid race to market. And it's kind of what it was 10 years ago, that you had to have a .com strategy or a mobile strategy, and everyone was throwing mobile apps up there. So today we're in this environment where everyone is pitching connected devices, IoT devices. And so it means a lot of things to different. Is it ambient sensors that collect data one way? Is it, devices that collect the personal information? So I do think it's important to segment and classify. So you'll hear from that, I think, from us. I think also you have to look at by use cases. So no different than enterprise security and devices and how they're hardened for that versus hardened for the use of the home. I think if you look at those two ends of the spectrum, that's important, because what's perhaps needed for critical infrastructure or for the utility grid is not necessarily the same. So I think it's careful that we don't, one size does not fit all, unfortunately. So that's just our view right now. And hopefully we could just submit these comments orally and we'll be done. So
wouldn't that be nice?
So I encourage anyone else, again, to, I did get some comments submitted to us earlier here. We do think it's important in these areas here. Obviously, number 5, I think you're going to hear a fair amount of what we have done. We think it's comprehensive. We think it's significant, and not to be, championing our own efforts, but I think it's an example of what a multi-stakeholder effort can do when it's not dominated by the interests of trade groups, and finding balance. And so we've had, one of the things, as you know, Travis, when I met, is that I applaud your efforts and those by John and Alan, but it can be really hard, as you know, in a multi-stakeholder effort where trade groups suck the air out of the room, and consensus means a very limited impact. And so I'm very proud of the effort in our effort of what we've achieved, and where we've had consumer advocates on one side and we've had manufacturers on the other, and when it's in a more, I guess you would say, curated model, more of a kind of controlled, we actually, a lot can be achieved. And I think that's a real lesson learned in the process. But I know that's outside the scope here. But so we expect to, talk about what we've done and why we think it's important in that area.
And I think that that's great, and this is a great opportunity to have this be, I mean, not that your work isn't public, but have this be a part of the public record and the public conversation about IoT.
Great. So I'm going to just go through. I know some of the members, sent me comments and a little marked up on some ones that were important here. And one question is, is OTA respond to all of these? And the answer is no.
Yeah.
And I guess there's an important part. You may want to, I don't. It's in my interpretation. Ask for your feedback, but companies can and anyone can respond, and anyone can cherry pick these, where they come up with item number 42 that they think wasn't even addressed. Is that fair to say?
That is absolutely fair to say, and we tried to make that be clear on that in the lead up to the RFC. This is a large number of questions, and we expect that every question will have someone interested in it, but there will be very few people who are interested in all of the questions, right? Which, it's possible that there are people, but we absolutely encourage organizations, individuals, companies to answer the questions that are most relevant to them, and to really focus their feedback.
Are there any questions that I'm going to use the word, probably not the right word, you struggled with, or you're trying to really get your head around an issue that you would like others to perhaps provide some additional thought and perspective on? Anything jumps out to you that we're...
Well, I'm going to be humble here and say that if I sit down and look at almost any of these questions as myself an individual, I need help. And so I think that so essentially I'm guessing that you're asking, are there questions that are higher priorities than others, or are there questions that we in particular are struggling with? And I would say so. I would say that the question that we are most in, the punchline of all of this, I think that it's really important to figure out what the benefits are in terms of having this broader conversation. I think it's really important to talk about what the challenges are in terms of issue spotting and figuring out what we need to focus our energies on. But the punchline of this green paper is really truly that last part, which is, what is the proper role of government? And we, of course, have thoughts and feelings on that, right? But we really want to hear from you and from the community what everyone thinks that role should be. And that is specific to the Department of Commerce, but that's also broader in terms of what the government's role should be in addressing these concerns, in fostering the opportunities. So if I were to say where the emphasis should be, and not so much what we're struggling with, but what we want to hear your feedback on, is that.
Great. So the question here, I just want to kind of more of ask a question, and I don't know the answer to this. We're aware of some of the activities by NIST, but can you maybe provide a little more context in number 7 here that I've highlighted? Hopefully you can see it on the screen.
Yeah.
And for those who can't, I'll just read it out. NIST and NTIA are actively working to develop and understand many of the technical underpinnings for IoT technologies and their applications. What factors should the Department of Commerce and, more generally, the federal government consider when prioritizing their technical activities with regard to IoT and its applications, and why? So, to my knowledge, the focus with NIST has been relooking at the NIST framework, cybersecurity framework, and then the second element has been for critical industrial controls. But can you perhaps bring us up to speed a little bit of some of the other areas, and maybe there's some...
So there's also the systems reference architecture that is actively being worked on. That there has been a draft that has been circulated on that, and they're currently actively working through the comments that were posted on the reference architecture. NIST also has been quite active, as have other parts of the Department of Commerce, on smart cities. And then finally, NTIA, which maybe you know about, maybe you don't. We actually have a facility out in Boulder, Colorado, the ITS, Information Technologies. Oh gosh, I'm blanking on the. I apologize. I'm blanking on the acronyms. So many acronyms. But our ITS out in Boulder, where we actually do experiments with spectrum. We actually work on spectrum issues. And we have one of the 2 radio dead zones in the United States. And so one of the projects that we're working on with that, in conjunction with NIST, is the Model Cities program, where we're working on what the effect of IoT and smart cities will be on spectrum use. Got
it. A comment, signed comment, someone submitted. Please do not hold your workshop in Gaithersburg.
Okay. I can promise nothing, but I will keep that in mind.
For those of you who don't know, that's kind of like a private drive for some of us. Gaithersburg is not very convenient to get to, but there's
putting it out there. I personally don't own a car, so it would be hard for me to get to as well.
Well, you take the red line to the end, and then you wait for the bus, and then you take the bus. So.
Yep.
But this is helpful on there. There was also some other points on number 11 that I thought was very interesting. And I'm going to just scroll here. And again, if someone has another one that they want to point out, and it was interesting, quantify and measure the sector. And I'll be honest with you, this has been a hard one for us even to get a whole factor on of device sales, and we extrapolated from some of the retailers. But is this kind of saying that devices that under a certain level would not you not be looking at, or what was when you're looking at your
Well, so just to give you a little bit of context for this question, and I will please take this answer with a little bit of a grain of salt. I'm not an economist. I'm not an expert in this. These questions came from our economists. We do have our statistical office. We have the census. We have the Department of Commerce has quite a bit of measuring and economist firepower. And so these questions are from asking the community, and specifically probably economists, how should we go about measuring this, as both as a sector and in terms of its economic impact. In terms of your specific question of how where that cutoff line should be, I think that's actually the question, is how should that work? And it's possible that our economists have some ideas about that, but this is something that I'm sure that they would want to hear back from in terms of what the community's thoughts are on how this should be measured, how it should be quantified, how we should talk about this.
Yeah, clearly I'm not an economist, so I'm not even going to try and go down that path. But it is an interesting when I sit down at the retailer and they start to talk about the smart light bulbs versus the baby cams versus the Fitbits, and to a certain point, anything electronic, will it be an IoT device in X amount of years? Sensors, and you look at home appliances. So it's a very interesting question. Clearly it's not one I expect OTA to respond on, but it is. It almost would be, what isn't going to be a connected device in 5 years?
And that's an interesting question.
So on there, what it was, number 13 is also one that we've spent a lot of time talking about, and it's the supply chain, but we've been focusing on the supply chain of the device manufacturers. And the concern is that today there's a lot of off-the-shelf firmware, code libraries that are being used and such. And the risk of that supply chain either having a vulnerability tomorrow and such in there. And so, in a sense, if you think about traditional PC manufacturers had some issues in, of corrupted hard drives that had spyware on them at one point. So we've been focusing more on that side of it. But I think this question is in general how supply chains use IoT. So it's kind of
I think that was the initial intent of the question. However, I would say that that's a perfectly acceptable answer because I think that it would nonetheless affect as a challenge to the proliferation of IoT on supply chains or on manufacturer using supply chains, right? I think that that's a perfectly legitimate answer to that question, even though I think the initial intent was to ask about the use of IoT in supply chains.
Yeah, I think we'll have some talk about it. Part of it is this rush to market, and there was a study that came out, I don't know if you saw it, Travis, from Atlantic Magazine published it, and they made a comment that the companies that focus on security are at a disadvantage because there's so many new products being introduced every week. So it kind of basically had the argument that if you focus on security and some of these issues and developing the stuff themselves, you're going to be at a market disadvantage. And so kind of you need to rush to market, which is kind of concerning. We'll probably reference that in our response.
Okay. Excellent.
But it is this challenge to market dynamics. And, I met with a company yesterday, a large company, and they said, what, we know if we don't have the product in the retailer shelf by November, we've lost holiday. And so that means we have to ship it by October. And some of these things we know we're going to have to deal with after the first of the year. And it's a reality of consumer products and consumer electronics channel. And that's a concern. And I think in this, so it means you take shortcuts. What can you do to rather develop the code themselves, reuse code? And those are some concerns. I think it's a reality based on the market dynamics and the maturity of the market right now.
Excellent. Great. We're looking forward to having your comments on that.
And I think the other two ones that are very close to us, and I see there's some people that I think share some of our concerns about privacy, is the trend that more and more of these devices are building a data model as part of their business model. And so the privacy concerns for us, there's two aspects of it. One, are there adequate disclosures prior to product acquisition? And we see this uniquely different than when you download an app and you get the privacy policy to accept a physical product. And we'd like to suggest that we need to think of a different model of appropriate consent. One of the FTC's commissioners said, well, you buy a TV at home and you have it on your wall and you're going through the setup, that's appropriate. And, we kind of think that's not necessarily the case because, again, you made this investment, you bought $1,000, and the time of disclosure shouldn't be when you're ready to watch, Kobe's last game, and you have to kind of, So that's one concern. And the other part is the data. So a lot of our comments there, and then the ownership of that data. So in the scenario where the company goes out and decides to shut down the service, what happens to your data? Who owns that data? So I do think this is a big area. And one of the other areas that ourselves and some other leading organizations such as Consumer Federation of America responded to yesterday was this concern of a privacy divide. And are you familiar with that issue that's emerging?
I am.
Mm-hmm. And so for those of you who are on the webinar, the concern is that I might get two-tier pricing, or those who are most economically at a disadvantage, or perhaps even from an education standpoint, that are trading their privacy for functionality, and potentially it could be predatory and such on there. So we're very concerned about that as a global issue by all stakeholders right now.
And that we were hoping to get to with question 19. So question 19, we're asking specifically about that.
Right. So you're chiming in, so that's pretty good there. So I think we'll point to some of those issues as well. So there's a lot of great work here. We're going to be working very closely. 18 is obviously also protection issues. We're very concerned, and so I think you'll see a fair amount in this area from us. I think the questions are great to raise the question. I think ultimately is if the consumer can be provided adequate notice prior to product acquisition, and how that's done is a whole separate thing. And the other concern is that the features that consumers are buying a product for should not be contingent on them sharing their personal information to unaffiliated third parties. And that's just a challenge today because, again, we're in a current model where, quite frankly, manufacturers say, well, if we disclose in our privacy policy that we're going to do this, we've met our requirements. And we don't think in a physical product on there. So we do see a lot of differences. Than the traditional website you're visiting or the web app you're downloading for 99 cents. Mm-hmm. So I want to, I think those are the key issues that we had. I want to encourage everyone. I want to thank the questions we received. Are there anything else, or Maddie, you're on the call. Is there anything else that jumped out to you or that we've missed on some of the questions that have been submitted to us?
Yeah, I actually did have one, and it kind of, to me, crosses over some of the categories. It's a little bit embedded in the sense of economy and what is the impact of proliferation going to have on, benefits and challenges for workers and everyone. But it also crosses over in the privacy very much. It is the idea of, over time, people becoming sort of prisoners to their data history. And it does speak to the concept of who owns the data or who can control it, but also the further concepts of data profiling or the implications if there's a very long history of my health data or a very long history of my activity data around my house or these kinds of things, how that might be used. And obviously, some obvious ones are marketing, but some other ones are insurance categorization or access to something, or gee, your history indicates that you've been doing X, Y, or Z. Maybe that means we don't want to hire you for this or sell you that or do something. And so that was just sort of one whole category that I felt like crossed a lot of these questions. That's not quite OTA's exact arena, but just these questions of who owns the data and what happens when you accumulate a very large history of it and how people can use that.
And I think that's a great issue to raise, and I think that it's also one of those difficult questions in terms of what is different, right? Because IoT crosses over very much into the same conversation that we've been having about big data,
yeah,
and
exactly.
And so a lot of the issues and a lot of the conversations that we were having about big data are being carried over into IoT. With potentially a slight more focus on collection as opposed to the analytics. So I think that's a great point to raise, and I hope that people will comment on that.
Yeah, and I'll actually add to that. I'm glad you brought it in there. I'd say it actually takes it to another level of big data because the ultra sensitivity of the dynamics of your physical location tracking. Let's say it's a health device or not a health, a fitness band of some sort, and then other data that your heart rate, other information. So the level of granularity of data overlapping with your physical geolocation data and your patterns of that take it to another level. Because we think of big data today. It's your web history, your purchase history, some other things here. It's been less about your biometrics, for example. And so we see that, and as you start thinking about that, if your car manufacturer is collecting that data on you, and your health band information is collected on there, you have a significant. It's taken to another level. At least that's my view of it. So I'm glad you mentioned. I think that's an important point. that again, not to say it's wrong, because I think the very first page, Travis, you guys did there's a tremendous amount of consumer benefit, and we don't want to lose sight of that. I think it's about having it's responsible data collection and usage, it's consent, and that we recognize that, but at the same time, it can't be the Wild West, and and I think that will impede growth. So again, I want to thank you tremendously for taking the time. I'm going to just go back to the summary slide that you had, if I can figure this out for a second. Go back to, there we go here. On your comments here, slide here, it should be showing, I believe. Let me see here. Yep. And again, don't wait till the last moment. But and again, any members that have questions, we're certainly happy to help. And I think there is obviously some additional information here. So thank you again for you taking your time. We appreciate your support, and we look forward to seeing you at your event in the upcoming months. Thank you.
Great. Thank you.